You probably already know the storyline, right? We participated in a grueling 100-mile gravel race in a field of never-ending hills. Riders pushed their limits until they couldn't anymore. Some finished and some didn't. The end. Well, that might be how most gravel bike race stories go, but the Sto Mil story goes beyond this. Follow along on our Sto Mil journey and see the 2023 course, learn more about this race's story, and discover why the Sto Mil is more than just your average gravel bike race. The Bohemian Sto Mil unfolds in eastern Nebraska. Serving as the central hub for this event is the Checkin Lake Recreation Area, situated just on the outskirts of Prague, Nebraska. The Sto Mil experience begins with check-in the night before the race and free camping around the lake. Most of the riders who camped did so nearby the shelter that housed all the main happenings. Before we knew this, we set up camp a little further north on a picturesque hill at an area with plenty of room for our group to spread out. Further down the hill from our campsite were places with RV hookups for a small fee. When we set up camp, it was a bit breezy and we knew temperatures were expected to fall overnight, but we wanted the full Bohemian Sto Mil experience. As the sun was falling, we enjoyed games, the sharing of tall tales around the campfire, and anxiously discussed the challenges and unknowns on the path ahead before we called it a night. After a night filled with more anticipation than sleep, we crawled out of our tents to a brisk and frosty, but overall calm and comfortable morning. We brewed up some coffee, ate some breakfast, filled our water bottles, and packed our bike bags full of fuel for the day. The course, which changes every year, is published for participants to see just 1 week before race day. This year's course was 101.1 miles, and I have seen measured and estimated vert ranging between 6K to well over 9K. But I think everyone was in agreement that whatever it was a lot. The route was more or less a figure eight, with the first loop to the north and the second loop to the south, including 3 checkpoints, roughly 25 miles apart. As the sun started warming things up, we made our way to the starting area, where there were kolaches and other pastries from a local community bakery for everyone. Riders that didn't camp were participating in late check-in. Then the organizers shuffled people to the starting line, where Ryan climbed atop the pace car and addressed the riders. His speech was about as dressed up as the event was. He briefly thanked the local sponsors for food and beer and said go. The Average Joe's group consisted of 4 riders. Amanda loves all things bicycle related and was the group member lobbying everyone else to ride the Sto Mil. Mason was the first on board and joined Amanda in persuading others. He's a recovering roadie, but we don't hold that against him. Joe's more of a it's the smiles, not the miles kind of guy, but was down for the Sto Mil given its esteemed notoriety. And myself, a guy that was clearly out of place at an event like this, but was stoked I could tag along with my friends and participate anyways. Pretty early on, it became clear who came to race and who came to ride, as the top riders pushed up front and the riders like us soaked up the view and enjoyed the ride from a little further back. The race takes place in an area known locally as the Bohemian Alps. The Bohemian Alps are a region with seemingly endless rolling hills. As you pedal through the area, you may develop a love-hate relationship with the landscape. For me, it's an intriguing area to go through, thinking about its geologic past and the processes that shape the landscape we see today. The soils, landscape, surface water and groundwater, and even the pattern of human settlement that we see today in the region are directly related to its geology and geologic history. Although some of the sediments and all the rock strata from which it had been eroded are older, the actual landscape we see today is essentially the product of glacial ice flowing water, and wind active during the Pleistocene and Holocene epochs of the Quaternary period. The development of the modern landscape begins with the onset of continental glaciation around 2.5 million years ago. The region experienced many different advances, with the last being around 21,000 years ago. The Laurentide ice sheet, which attained a maximum thickness of around 10,000 feet or more in the far north of Canada, advanced southward into northeast Nebraska multiple times during the Pleistocene epoch. It would bring with it debris ranging in size from large glacial erratics to clay. When the glaciers retreated, they dropped all this material, collectively known as till, onto the landscape. Then, over thousands of years, water and wind shaped the landscape into the dissected till plain we see today. Additionally, deposits of loess, which is essentially geologists' jargon for dust accumulating over time, settled onto the landscape, mantling the hills and creating the foundation to the fertile soils that now support the area's inhabitants and their livelihood. The first quarter of this year's route took us through the dissected till plains, dropped us down into the Platte Valley for a short stretch, just so we had to climb what is known as Bohemian Everest back atop the rolling hills of the dissected till plain again. This region was largely settled during the Homestead Act in the later half of the 1800s by pioneers that were mostly Czech or Bohemians. The nearby town Prague was entirely Czech and named for the capital city of Bohemia, Prague. The Czech pioneers endured misfortune and apparently insurmountable difficulties assailed them, but they stayed and surmounted them to shape the region into what it is still today. The gravel race and its creators draw on the Czech heritage, from serving kolaches to the spelling of the checkpoints to even the name, with Sto Mil being Czech for 100 miles. The local economy is mostly based on agriculture, with corn being the biggest cash crop, followed by soybeans, alfalfa, beef cattle, and other livestock. As we rode through the landscape on a delightful fall Saturday, the farmers were out harvesting this year's corn and bean crop. I'm sure there were farmers annoyed cyclists were using their roads during their busy time of the year, and I'm sure there were cyclists annoyed farmers were using the racetrack they came to ride. But for the most part, we only encountered courtesy and friendly folks. We went out of our way to get over and be patient, since it's their property taxes paying for the roads we were enjoying, and we were just guests recreating in their backyard. The second quarter of the race was from the first checkpoint back to the starting point where checkpoint number 2 had been set up. This section was mostly just lots of rolling hills without any major trend up or down. There was a good mix of nice rolling, hard-packed gravel and minimum maintenance roads, with the occasional areas having deep enough gravel to make riders with skinny tires pucker a little. Most all the gravel in the area is pea gravel, with a little bit of crushed white rock here and there. We left the second checkpoint with fewer friends than we started the journey with, but Joe and I eagerly pressed on. Perhaps in part because the night before, Mason displayed the bottle of Malort that he brought, proclaiming people in our group that didn't finish had to take a shot when they dropped out. Few things provide better motivation than not drinking that garbage. The Bohemian Sto Mil originated from an idea two friends had while bikepacking the region. Ryan and Russell said they loved the gravel and dirt roads that they rode during their trip and decided to host a ride in the area. The first race was hosted in 2017 with 47 registered riders. It has grown over the years as word is spread, but it has maintained that small event atmosphere. While in the thick of it, it might feel like the kind of event that you need a personal invitation from Laz himself to participate in, all you need to register is a postcard and a stamp. Unlike other highfalutin races, the Sto Mil's registration is just as welcoming and inclusive as the event itself. The third quarter of the race was by far the hardest for us. It was likely a combination of many factors, but I think the biggest ones were the general trend upward in elevation, and the wind was starting to pick up by the time we were traveling it, and of course it was out of the southwest, creating a headwind for much of this section. Joe and I didn't have bona fide gravel bikes, so we rode the best we had. Joe was on his commuter, which didn't have the gears on the low ends really needed for climbing the steep hills. I was on my fat bike, which, aside from rolling like a battle tank, was geared way too low. This, combined with us not really being in good enough shape for the event, had us hiking up several of the hills in this quarter. But it didn't hurt our feelings or kill our high spirits. It felt good to get off the bike once in a while, and we were still moving in the right direction. Obviously, if there's not a financial interest for the group running the event, it takes a lot of hard work from great people willing to donate their time and effort. Russell Party, Ryan Albertson, and Gina Kovanda organize and run this event. They put in a lot of time and effort creating an event just for all of us to enjoy, and for that we salute them. Beyond that, the event takes more help to power the aid stations at the checkpoints and keep things moving smoothly. The third checkpoint was ran by the Mafia, 3 guys that not only volunteer their time, but stock the aid station from their own pockets. And if that wasn't enough, like a glimpse of a lighthouse beacon on a stormy sea, they even had beer. I was expecting the last quarter to be the most brutal, just because I knew I would be the most tired by then. But the overall trend was downward, and we were no longer battling the headwind. So it seemed far easier than the previous quarter. Or maybe it was the vicious little border collie pups chasing us along. Who's to say? Joe was striving to achieve 2 victories, finishing the whole race, and then the battle within the battle, eating all 6 honey buns he brought. As he achieved the latter, we turned our sights on the other. I realize this is a race and not a ride for a lot of people, but the racers missed out on the best part, I think. As we neared the finish line, golden hour was incredible in this landscape and was like the icing on the cake for the day. The headwind that we battled earlier in our ride would have now been a tailwind, but instead the wind stopped altogether and it became still and beautiful. It was pretty incredible to watch the landscape turn gold and then the shadows grow as we rode through the hills. As the sun was setting, you could feel the temperature inversion as we rode down the hills into the cool valleys between. Just as the sun was throwing in the towel for the day, Joe and I made our way to the finish line, getting every last minute out of the day. We were coming in last in our categories, and you may be saying, what the hell? Thought you guys were average Joes, not below average. While our performance was certainly below average, I'm confident we had way more fun than the average person, so I think it balances out to average. Besides, less than half the registered participants finished this year, so I'm saying we're still well within the realm of average. This very well may be the only organized ride I ever participate in, so I'm very happy to say it was the Sto Mil. I think it's pretty damn cool that such a fun event with a world-class course offers it all with such a low bar of entry. If you think you've got what it takes to conquer the Sto Mil experience, we would encourage you to give it a shot. Just remember their local pirate code. Be a decent human being. Like Kate, who blew our doors off somewhere around mile 65, was waiting at the finish line with the organizers and others to congratulate us as we rode across the finish line. Because at the end of the day, all the decent human beings like these people are what made this such a great experience for us. Cheers, and ride on, Sto Mil.